They told me not to get too close, but I was already too close the moment I saw him. My name is Alara, and if you're watching this because you think this is just another girl meets animal story, let me warn you now. This isn't about taming a lion. It's about being seen by one and realizing you can't go back to who you were before. I didn't come here looking for peace, or meaning, or even safety. I came here to disappear. The plane ticket to South Africa was booked at 3:17 a.m. while sitting on the bathroom floor, mascara smudged down my face, my heart pounding so loud I could barely hear the silence around me. My therapist had told me I was close to burnout. My friends had said I needed a break. My boss told me I was dramatic. So I left. I didn't tell anyone I was going. I shut off my phone, deleted the apps, and packed a single bag with more fear than clothing. That's how I ended up at Kumela Wildlife Sanctuary, a dusty place at the edge of a game reserve, surrounded by chain-link fences, cracked earth, and the quiet hum of animals who no longer knew freedom. I signed up to volunteer for a month, 30 days. Long enough to breathe. Not long enough to start over. At least that was the plan. Until I met him. I first saw the lion on day 2. They called him Aziel. He was kept in one of the larger enclosures, set far from the others, almost like the land itself respected his space. He wasn't the biggest lion there, not by size, but by presence. He didn't pace like the others. He didn't roar for attention. He didn't respond when the workers threw him meat over the fence. He didn't even glance when I swept the path near his pen or refilled his water. But he watched. I could feel it. Even when I wasn't looking at him, my skin tingled like I was being studied. Not hunted. Not threatened. Just seen. Fully. Quietly. Constantly. The sanctuary's founder, a grizzled woman named Moira, saw me lingering one morning and said, "That one's different. Doesn't take to people. Doesn't play nice. Best not to get attached." I nodded, but I didn't move, and neither did Aziel. I started talking to him on day 4, just softly, while sweeping or walking by with feed buckets. Not secrets, not stories, just pieces. "My name's Alara. You're not like the others, are you? I can't sleep at night either." He never reacted, never growled, never turned his back, but his eyes followed me. Always. Dark amber, still as stone. Ancient as silence. There was a scar across his right brow, jagged and white. I didn't know how he got it. No one at the sanctuary talked about what came before the rescue. Some things, I guess, were too heavy to name. Maybe he didn't remember, or maybe he remembered too well. The other volunteers didn't understand. "Why do you always go to his enclosure?" one girl asked. "He just lies there like a statue," another scoffed. But it wasn't about what he did. It was about what he didn't. Aziel never begged, never demanded, never expected. He simply was. In his stillness, I saw myself, or maybe the version of me I used to be. Before the overwork, before the panic attacks, before the man who left without warning, as if I had just become a burden too heavy to carry. Aziel didn't carry me, but he didn't leave either. On the 8th day, I sat down by the fence. I didn't mean to. I had been cleaning out the hose line nearby when my hands started shaking. No trigger, no sound. Just the cold rush of nothing inside me again. That old friend that made my chest tighten and my vision blur. I dropped the wrench, sank to the ground, and cried. Not loud, not pretty. Just tears down red dirt and sweat-streaked cheeks. I didn't realize he'd come closer. But when I looked up, he was there. Aziel, 3 feet from the fence. Silent. Staring. Like he'd been waiting. For the moment, I stopped pretending I was okay. I wanted to speak, to say thank you, or go away, or help me. But the words caught in my throat. He didn't need them. He lowered his head, just slightly, and then lay down, still watching, still breathing, still with me. I didn't move for an hour, and neither did he. After that, something shifted. I began seeking out his enclosure like it was a chapel. Not for comfort, not for prayer, just to exist without pressure. Some mornings I read aloud, books I found in the volunteer's hut, poems, pages from a travel journal, even a trashy romance I didn't finish. Aziel never flinched. Sometimes I sang under my breath. He listened. Or maybe not, but it felt like he did, like he absorbed every piece of noise and gave it back to me as silence. Not empty, not cruel, but clean. Like the kind of silence that doesn't need to be filled. Then came the night that changed everything. I'd had a fight with Moira. She'd snapped at me during feeding rotations, said I was too soft, that I spent more time talking to that lion than doing real work. I didn't yell back. I just walked away, straight to Aziel. It was after hours. Volunteers weren't supposed to be at the pens at night. But I needed him. I needed that stillness, that gaze, that reminder that I hadn't disappeared completely. I stood outside the fence, breathing heavy. "Why don't you move?" I whispered. "Why do you just stay there like you know me?" Aziel didn't answer. Of course he didn't. So I got angry. Tired, frustrated, worn out from being fragile, and I did something reckless. I shoved the gate. It didn't open. It was still locked, but I wanted it to. I wanted him to flinch, to leave, to do anything but lie there like I didn't scare him, like I didn't matter. "I tried to push you away," I shouted, and for the first time, he stood up, not slowly, not threatening, but with purpose, his full height, his full weight, shoulders rolling like waves under golden fur. And he walked toward the fence, each step deliberate. And then he stopped, inches from me. I froze. Breath caught, chest heaving. He looked into me, through me, and didn't move. Not an inch. I pressed my palm against the wire mesh, and I whispered, "Why aren't you afraid of me?" He blinked, and I swear I heard it, not in sound but in feeling, because I know what it's like to be caged, and still choose to stay. I didn't sleep that night. Even after I left the fence, even after Aziel disappeared back into the darkness of his enclosure like a fading memory, I couldn't shake the feeling. Something had shifted. Not in him. In me. That lion had moved. Not out of instinct. Not because of food or training or some kind of cue. He had moved because I had pushed, and he hadn't backed away. He had come closer, and I didn't know what to do with that. The next morning, the sky was overcast, smeared with streaks of pale gray. A dry breeze carried the scent of old leaves and something sharp. Stormlight, maybe. The sanctuary was quiet, more subdued than usual. Even the birds kept their chatter to a murmur. I went through the motions. Feeding stations, water, checks, raking straw. No one asked me about last night. I guess they hadn't noticed I'd been out past curfew, but I noticed everything. I noticed the way my hands trembled when I walked past Aziel's pen. I noticed how he wasn't in his usual corner. And I noticed the silence in my chest when I didn't see him immediately. Panic bloomed behind my ribs. Had I scared him off? Did I break something? But then he stepped forward, from behind a low patch of acacia near the back fence, his golden mane catching light like a burning halo. He was watching me, not just casually, watching only me. It became a pattern. Aziel, who never responded to any other worker, began appearing when I came close. Slowly, subtly, sometimes halfway hidden in the shadows. But he came. Every time. He didn't roar, didn't paw at the fence. He simply existed near me, eyes calm and deep and ancient, like I was part of some old rhythm he'd remembered. I started, speaking to him again. Not just in passing, not lightly. I told him things. Real things. I left everything behind, I whispered one evening, crouched in the red dust, and I thought it would free me. But now I don't know who I am without it all. He lay down, head resting on his massive paws. I used to be the strong one, always holding it together, always fixing everyone else's mess. And when I finally collapsed, they just moved on. Aziel blinked slowly, not dismissing, not judging, just receiving. And that did something to me. Something words couldn't touch. Moira noticed the change. "You're spending too much time with him," she said one afternoon, arms crossed, sun beating, down behind her like an accusation. "I do my work," I replied. "It's not about that," she snapped. "That lion, he's not a therapy pet, Alara. He's dangerous, unpredictable. You can't know him." I didn't answer, because she was right. I didn't know him. But he knew something in me, and that had to count for something. On day 15, the rains came. It was sudden. A thick sheet of water crashing over the dry land, the kind of storm that smells like rebirth and ruin all at once. The staff scrambled to move equipment under cover. I helped secure tarps, tugged crates back into the main barn, hands slick and raw from rope burns. And then, thunder. Loud, cracking, violent. Animals howled and shrieked in the distance. And Aziel? Aziel roared. The first time I'd heard it. A sound, so deep it cracked the air around me. It wasn't wild rage. It wasn't hunger. It was command. I ran to his enclosure, instinct taking over, just to see if he was okay. The path was flooded. Mud swallowed my boots. And there he was, standing tall at the front of the pen, soaked, defiant, radiant in the storm. He looked at me, straight through the rain, and I didn't know whether to cry or bow. Because in that moment, he wasn't just a lion. He was something older than time, and he had chosen me. That night, I couldn't sit still. I paced my bunk, replayed everything in my head, his eyes in the storm, his roar in my bones. Why me? Why now? It made no sense. But sometimes the soul doesn't need logic. It just needs a place to land. The next day, I brought a chair. A ridiculous plastic thing I dragged out to the edge of his enclosure, half embarrassed, half trembling. I sat. He lay down, a few meters away, and we just existed, together. No words, no gestures, just being. That's when the other volunteers started whispering, "She's too attached. What if the fence breaks?" This isn't safe. They weren't wrong, but they didn't understand. I wasn't chasing a fairy tale. I was finding myself reflected in a creature that had lost everything and chose stillness over chaos. That's a kind of bravery no human had ever shown me. Then came the mistake. It wasn't big, but it was enough. Was leaning too close, trying to pick up a fallen bowl from just inside the fence edge, when my hand slipped. Not inside the enclosure, but near enough to trigger a response. Aziel rose instantly. Quick, sharp, alert. The others saw. Moira saw. She pulled me back so fast I scraped my arm on the fence. "What did I tell you?" she shouted. "You're getting reckless!" "He wasn't going to hurt me," I insisted. "You can't know that. He's not what you think he is. He's not what you think he is either." Her words hit hard, but it wasn't her voice that haunted me that night. It was my own. The echo of what I hadn't said yet, what I couldn't say, that I needed him. Not for safety, but because he didn't ask me to be anything but real. I went to his pen after lights out. One last time. I sat in the mud, heart pounding, and I said, I'm leaving soon. Aziel didn't move. I don't want to go, I whispered. But I don't belong here either, do I? Stillness, and then he stepped forward. Not fast, not dramatic, just close, closer than he'd ever been. And he sat, right at the fence. His nose inches from mine. No sound, no movement, just presence, just truth. I pressed my hand to the wire. I tried to push you away, I said, voice cracking. And you didn't move. He blinked, like he forgave me before I even asked. It had been 19 days since I arrived at the sanctuary. 19 days since I'd left behind the smoke and glass of a life that had nearly broken me. And in those 19 days, the only constant, other than the ache behind my ribs, was him, Aziel, the lion who didn't move, the lion who didn't roar unless the world gave him no choice, the lion who saw me before I saw myself. And now, I was afraid of him. Not because he was dangerous, but because he wasn't. Because he stayed. And I wasn't sure I deserved that. I stood outside his enclosure, arms crossed tight against the wind. My name tag hung lopsided on my jacket, and my heart was doing that stuttering thing again, beating too fast for someone who was technically standing still. Aziel was only a few feet away, lying in his usual spot like a statue cut from the earth itself. I didn't speak. I couldn't. The words felt too heavy. Like if I said anything, something inside me would snap. But still, I waited. And of course, he didn't move. Moira had called me in that morning. Not for punishment, not for reprimand. Just concern. You're leaving soon, she said. 2 weeks left, maybe less. You need to start detaching. From what? I asked, though I knew exactly what she meant. From him. I didn't answer, and she leaned forward, lowering her voice. Aziel's seen more than you know. He's not a project. He's not a friend. He's a lion. If you get too close, if you blur that line, it won't end well. Not for him, not for you. I nodded like I understood, but inside I screamed, because I had already blurred the line, and I didn't want to go back. That evening, I made a decision. I wouldn't go to the fence. I wouldn't sit near him. I wouldn't let him watch me fall. Apart again. It was better that way. Clean, controlled. A surgical cut. I buried myself in work, scrubbed feed bins until my hands blistered, hauled water jugs too heavy for my size, avoided the path that curved toward Aziel's enclosure like it was cursed. But I felt him, even when I couldn't see him, even when I forced myself not to look. It was like trying not to think about your own heartbeat. The silence left space for everything I didn't want to feel, and still, I didn't go to him. By day 3 of avoidance, the other animals started reacting. A cheetah paced restlessly. The wild dogs howled more than usual. One of the older lions, Rudo, roared for an entire hour without pause. Something was off. The whole sanctuary felt wrong. Tense. Like a storm without clouds. And then came the moment I broke. I'd been cleaning the medical hut when I found the photo, an old one, tucked behind a clipboard. Aziel, years younger, thinner, chained inside a rusted cage. His eyes were the same. Wounded. Fierce. Still. I dropped the clipboard. Stepped outside. And ran. Not toward the dorms. Toward him. When I reached the fence, I stopped short. He was already waiting. standing this time, head high, tail still. No roar, no movement, just presence. The kind that presses against your ribs without touching you. I gripped the fence with both hands. "I'm sorry," I breathed. His ears twitched, but he didn't look away. I thought pushing you away would protect you, or me, or both. I laughed, bitter and shaky, but it didn't work. I took a step closer, and another, until we were only inches apart. Me on one side of the wire, him on the other. I pressed my forehead gently against the mesh and whispered, "The truth. I'm not scared of you, Aziel. I'm scared of what I see in you, because you don't run. And I always have." My voice cracked. "And when I tried to push you away, you didn't move." For the first time in 19 days, he stepped forward, one paw, then another. Slow, measured, immense. His face stopped just in front of mine. Nothing between us but a web of steel and shared breath. He blinked and lowered his massive head, a quiet invitation. I slid down to my knees, fingers curled in the dirt, face tilted toward his. No tears, just stillness, shared, unspoken, unshakable. And then I did what I hadn't dared to do before. I reached through the small opening at the bottom of the fence, the safe space where we passed meat during feeding, and held out my hand, palm up. He could have walked away. He could have ignored it, but he didn't. He lowered his nose, touched my fingers with the gentlest graze of warm breath and bristled whiskers, and stayed there, frozen in that fragile, perfect contact. Not because he had to, but because he chose to. I don't know how long we stayed like that. A few seconds? A few years? All I know is that when I finally stood again, something inside me had shifted. The panic wasn't gone, but it was quieter. Like Aziel had taken part of it and buried it somewhere only lions understand. Later that night, I sat in the dorm, lights off, window cracked. The other volunteers were asleep, but I couldn't stop replaying it. That stillness, that breath, that refusal to leave when it would have been easier. And suddenly, I knew. Aziel hadn't just helped me feel again. He had shown me what staying looks like, what it means to be unafraid of someone else's weight, to hold your ground, to not move, even when you're pushed. There are things you think you'll never say out loud, like, "I miss a lion more than I've ever missed a person," or, "The most honest conversation I've had in years was with something that doesn't speak." And yet, there I was. 1 week before, I was set to leave the sanctuary. 1 week before, I had to pretend to be Alara again, the woman who used to wear heels to meetings and smiled through panic attacks and answered emails with, "Of course, no problem." Except now, I couldn't remember how to be her. I didn't know who I was anymore. But Aziel did. And that made everything harder. It started with the letter. A single envelope on my bed, stamped and sealed in a way that immediately made my throat close. From my father. We hadn't spoken since the night I left. I opened it slowly. Inside, a single page. "Alara, your mother told me where you went. I'm glad you're alive. But when are you coming back to your senses? You've made your point. Now grow up, come home, and stop embarrassing yourself. No, I miss you. No, I'm sorry. Just a summons. A reprimand masked as concern." My vision blurred. I folded the letter, slipped it into my pocket like a piece of poison, and went straight to Aziel. He was already waiting. Lying in the dust, mane catching the late sun, gaze like thunderclouds full of silence. I stopped 3 feet from the fence and just stood there. "I thought distance would make this easier," I said, voice low. "That the more I prepared myself to go, the less it would hurt. He didn't blink, didn't twitch. He waited, and something inside me cracked. Because I couldn't hold it anymore. Not the pain, not the pressure, not the performance. I sank to the ground, pressed my hands to my face, and I shattered. It wasn't graceful, it wasn't cinematic, it was raw. My shoulders shook, and my throat tightened until I thought I'd never breathe again. The letter was still in my pocket, burning a hole through the fabric. Every word rang in my skull like a drumbeat. Grow up, come home, stop embarrassing yourself. I had left everything, my job, my home, my identity, because I was drowning, and now they were asking me to come back into the ocean, as if I'd never been broken, as if I could just forget this lion, this silence, this truth. When I finally looked up, Aziel was standing, tall, still, staring. He hadn't moved from his place. Not one step closer, not one step away, but the world between us felt smaller. He was with me, even as I fell apart. And he didn't demand that I hold myself together. A shadow passed behind me. Footsteps. It was Moira. She didn't say anything at first. Just stood there, arms crossed, watching both of us in silence. Then she spoke. Quietly. He does that. I turned to her, confused. Waits, she clarified. He's done it before. When one of the cubs was sick. When his sister died. He just stays. Not to comfort, not to rescue. Just to be there. I said nothing. She sighed and crouched beside me. I know I've been hard on you, she said. I see now. Maybe you needed him more than I understood. I shook my head. It's not about needing. It's about being seen, without having to ask. Moira looked at Aziel. He's always had that effect. But only on the ones who carry something heavy. Her voice dropped even lower. Like, he knows who's bleeding inside. The days passed faster after that. I tried to pretend they didn't, but the calendar on the wall didn't care about lions, or lost daughters, or broken versions of strength. It just ticked forward. One square at a time. I started writing again. Not just in journals. I wrote letters I'd never send, notes to the girl I used to be. Scribbled words on napkins, on the backs of old maps, on scraps of cardboard from the feed room. Sometimes I read them aloud. To Aziel. He never flinched. Just listened. His breath was slower now. More steady, more rhythmic. Like he was sinking with me, piece by fractured piece. Then, 3 days before my flight, something went wrong. I was in the back shed, stacking feed sacks, when I heard it. A bang. Metal on metal, then shouting, then running footsteps. Dropped everything, ran toward the noise, and stopped dead. Aziel's enclosure gate was open, not wide, but open, no lion in sight. 2 workers stood frozen. One held a tranq gun, the other looked pale. I didn't unlatch it, one shouted. I swear I didn't. Moira was already sprinting across the compound, barking orders. Find him, now! I barely registered my own body moving. All I knew was that Aziel, my Aziel, was loose, and I had to find him. The reserve was vast. Miles of brush, rock, and trees. Plenty of space for a lion to vanish. The others spread out in groups. I went alone. I don't know why. I just knew where to go. I found him at sunset, near the dry riverbed behind the east fence line, sitting, calm, looking out at the horizon like he'd seen it all before. I didn't shout, didn't run. I just walked toward him, slow, deliberate, unafraid. He turned his head, met my eyes, and blinked, like he'd been waiting for me, not the other way around. I stopped. 10 feet away, my voice trembled. You didn't run. He stood, stretched, and took one step toward me, and another, until we were close, closer than we'd ever been without a barrier, and still. I wasn't afraid. He didn't growl, didn't lunge, just stood there, breathing, living, choosing to stay. And I whispered it again. You waited. While I fell apart. They found us minutes later. The tranq gun never fired. Moira waved it down when she saw me kneeling beside him, hands limp at my sides, eyes filled with something that could only be described as peace. Aziel didn't move. He let them resecure the lead gate, let them guide him back, but the whole time, his eyes never left me. That night, I couldn't sleep. Not from fear, but from knowing what I'd lose, what I'd leave behind. Not just a lion, but a version of myself I had only just begun to understand, and a connection that no one else would ever believe. But I didn't need them. Too, because Aziel had waited, and I would never forget that. There's no way to pack the kind of silence that lives between you and a lion. I tried. I folded my shirts. I zipped my suitcase. I wrote a short note to Moira, thanking her for the opportunity. I deleted the boarding pass from my inbox twice before re-downloading it. But I couldn't touch the part of me that Aziel had changed. It wasn't something you could seal in a bag or scribble on a postcard. It was deeper, rooted, like a second spine made of memory and meaning, and something almost spiritual. I was leaving in the morning, and I had no idea how to say goodbye. The night before my flight, I walked to his enclosure one last time. No moon, no stars, just wind. Dry, warm, and heavy, with the weight of things unsaid. The sanctuary was asleep, but I couldn't. Not with him still awake out there. Aziel wasn't in his usual spot. Panic flared in my chest for half a second, but then I heard the low sound, familiar, soft. Not quite a purr, not quite a growl, a sound he only made when he was calm. I rounded the corner and saw him. He was standing by the far side of the enclosure, facing the trees, breathing slow and steady, not pacing, not roaring, just being. I didn't speak. Not yet. I needed to remember this. Him like this. Solid. Present. Watching the night like it belonged to him. And maybe, in a way, it did. I'm leaving, I said softly. His ears twitched. But I think you already knew that. He turned toward me then. Slowly. Eyes reflecting what little light there was. A shimmer of gold and something older than time. I don't know what I expected this to be, I continued. A reset? An escape? I thought I'd come here. Breathe. Some clean air. Pretend I was still strong. I gripped the fence between us. But I wasn't strong, Aziel. Not really. I was just functioning. Until I broke. He took a step forward, and I almost lost it right there. I dropped to my knees. The dust clung to my jeans, to my skin, but I didn't care. My forehead rested against the wire. I don't want to go back, I whispered. Not the same way, not to the same version of me. He didn't roar, didn't move, just looked, and I swear, I felt it, not words, not language, but knowing. He knew I would go, and he chose to stay. It wasn't a betrayal. It was mercy, because some things are too pure to be owned, too powerful to be followed home. Aziel was never mine, but he was with me. In the way mountains are with the sky, in the way silence is with breath, always close, never claimed. I stood, pulled something from my pocket, a thin strip of red cloth, frayed at the ends. It was from a shirt I'd worn on my first day. The one that tore when I tripped trying to carry feed buckets. Useless now. But I tied it to the fence anyway. A marker. A memory. A thank you. He stepped close as I finished the knot. Close, enough that I could hear his breath. Close enough to hear mine catch in my throat. And I whispered, "Don't forget me." He blinked once, and then he turned. Walked slowly back into the shadows of his enclosure, and didn't look back. I stood there for a long time, letting the wind thread through my hair, letting the silence settle one last time, letting go. The airport was a blur. Noise. Movement. People asking things, saying things, pretending everything was urgent and real. But I wasn't really there. I was still with him. Somewhere in the dust and the quiet and the fence between what I thought I knew and what I had become. When the plane took off, I pressed my forehead to the window. The landscape shrank below me. Trees, rivers, earth. And somewhere down there, a lion watched the world without fear. And I hoped he knew. I was still watching too. 3 months later, I sat at my apartment desk, the city outside buzzing like a machine that couldn't power down. Emails blinked on my screen. Meetings lined up like soldiers. But I didn't feel caged, because I wasn't pretending anymore. I wasn't surviving. I was choosing. And on the wall behind me, framed, simple, was a photo of a golden lion, eyes deep and unreadable, taken on my final morning at the sanctuary. Below it, pinned gently to the matting, a faded red strip of cloth. I get asked sometimes why I went, why I left the city, the job, the safe path. And I always smile. Because how do you explain that the strongest thing you ever met didn't speak? That the moment you broke, he didn't look away? That when you tried to push him out of your life, he didn't move? You don't explain. You just carry it, like a quiet roar in your chest.